There were undeniable advantages to being a Pezrin. Peering at her companions from the shadows of her bedroom, Zinchiki could appreciate several at once. Her metabolism was nearly as fast as Shulvanti's, but without all the, bulk. Instead of strength, she had speed and agility. And an Asaiak, though you couldn't be speciesist about such things. There were also the less tangible aspects to being a Pezrin, such as her insulated fur, and a sense of hearing that allowed her to detect security cameras. Her natural strengths were undeniably useful. As long as I didn't mind running about naked in the dark. Just at the moment, the feature she appreciated most was her vision. Her people's evolution as scarcity hunters bestowed Pezrin with a visual spectrum that ranged slightly into the infrared. It was a feature. You adapted to worlds where people were differently sighted. And always read the markings before sticking yourself in a refrigerator. Still, her visual range was usually an advantage. Shulvantian humans appeared to have a sense of cold that went from cool, cold, freezing. More sensibly, the Pezrin perception for cold ranged from I have fur, it's cool, the meat will keep. Her people simply had greater natural protection, but admittedly, the Pezrin's sense of cold lacked the same definition. Heat, on the other hand? When the creator bestowed you with fur, heat was something to avoid. One side of Pesh was a boiling desert, while the other was a frigid wasteland, and when you hunted for survival, the slightest trace of your prey was invaluable. Prey animals on Pesh also had pelts that were invisible in IR, and for her primitive ancestors, hunting would have been a grueling fight for survival. Off Pesh, though? Lacking a pelt, other species clearly revealed themselves in the infrared, their subtle changes in body temperature revealing a wealth of moods. It was useful to pathfinders when negotiating contracts, but most of the time it was simply a feature. You took such matters as a given when eating other cultures. Not that her warband did that, as a rule. Zinchiki had to admit her initial exposure to Shulvanti had been less than desirable. It hadn't mattered that Sochet Pan-Technical's curriculum was utterly impractical, or even that she'd been thrust into the situation by the scruff of her neck. No, she hadn't wanted to be there, but it was radiantly apparent her classmates hadn't wanted her there either. That the Academy was a different proposition was literally clear to see. No one at the Academy seemed to openly resent her presence, and the feeling was roughly mutual. Despite having to wait for his name, her Hakakt taught a useful subject, and while some of the curriculum was onerous, most of it was practical. Focused on developing young noblewomen, most of the coursework seemed adaptable to the administration of a warband. On the same claw, Shulvanti were always less pragmatic. Life boiled down to where your next meal would come from, but her new classmates were frequently sensible. They also had Valaxath, utility and worth. However indirectly, they had even brought her into contact with past. Zinchiki forced her psyche not to stiffen, and as she pondered the matter. After all, while personal, her courtship, neckbite claim with past was undeniably useful to the warband. However undignified, even her assault on the Northern Palace would hopefully be profitable. Sunchaser still hadn't said if her prize would make a good courtship gift. Regardless, her insight into their moods was sometimes useful. Her Hahakt sister Deshin was admirably intelligent, though more like her sister Raikishi in temperament. She usually had a fuzzy halo of blue or green, depending on what she was studying. The aura around the Kerbal sisters had always been a bright emerald, but since losing their prospective friendmate, Aku, both often strayed towards an amber so dusky it was nearly ashen. Arriving unexpectedly this morning, Kellak was wrapped in a blue so deep it blended into her skin, while Letzi, the fuzzy blue-green around her, was something new. Melondi, on the other hand, this was the first time she'd ever been painted black. And always make sure you ascend slowly, Tom Steinberg said, floating in the community swimming pool. Otherwise you'll get nitrogen bubbles in your blood, and that shit hurts. He might have looked strange in the wetsuit and scuba gear, but the peasant in the same equipment was even worse. Still, it was the middle of winter. Nobody was going to go swimming. In fact, the place was all but closed for the season. Tom had bribed a few people to reserve the place for training, but it hadn't been a big ask. He sunk below the water, gesturing for Pat Veery to follow him under. As the two bobbed under the water, Creep and Tragan looked on, shivering slightly. Well, Creep was shivering. Tragan was a dead-eyed Rakiri who found it quite warm. Or something. Creep didn't know what went on in Tragan's head, and frankly, the little maniac didn't want to know. So, Tom wants to plant a bomb in the hull? A shaped charge? Creep idly sucked on his spikeweed joint as he considered the plan. Set it off during the HFY fireworks? Tragan shrugged, her fur bristling with every movement. Nobody's gonna notice one bang among all the others. Humans, Creep just sighed. There's one problem. They'll know it was a robbery afterward, when one ship sinks and is missing all the valuable stuff. Tragan just stood there. Anybody's jumped ship will have to deal too. Ah yes, Tragan was very forward-looking. We're shooting someone's house up for money. You cover the back and get any bodies that come running. I think I got things covered there. I'm on board to cover the fail-safes. I'll sound the alarm when the ballast tank gets punched. Creep shrugged. Besides, it's a Frovey. Everyone will be watching that speech. That shit's pretty traditional. Tragan continued to stand there, considering. Yeah, that'll work. But back to the task at hand. Remember that bio-attack the Allnos did on Tlaxcolan? We plant a few more bombs around the harbour, everyone will blame them. Creep took another drag of the slightly psychedelic smoke, and giggled as he offered over the joint. Deeps. We can throw a few rhino around too. Hard our tracks and everything. Tragan took the spliff from Creep's fingers and took a puff, idly watching Tom and Pat Veery rise to the surface for the nth time. We telling Tom? She offered the smoking roll of leaf back to Creep. Nah. Creep accepted his joint back, sticking it right between his lips. He's too worried about collateral damage and covering his tracks to do something like that. Besides... He imitated Tom's Maryland accent. My tourism days are over. Tragan looked at him. Maybe it's because he's human, but without the barbarian voice? Creep looked at Tragan, a little annoyed. His terrorism days are over. Tragan watched Tom and Pat Veery some more. He was currently showing the peasant how to plant the bomb. Could have fooled me, she said slowly. Desi had watched her best friend with a measure of calm. The atmosphere around the breakfast table was subdued, but how could it not be? It was one thing to know Melondi was a princess of the Imperium. It certainly didn't show. It wasn't as if she walked around with some divine halo. Instead, she was just good-natured, amiable, and fun. It hadn't always been so clear why she focused on some things over others, but in hindsight it made perfect sense. For a princess, at least. Sitting with her, she was just a regular person. But a princess who was visibly upset? Upset wasn't a thing Melondi usually did. Occasionally uncertain or flustered, sure. Perturbed? Now and then. Most of the time, she held her emotions in check better than anyone else Desi knew, and right now the difference was like a calm before a storm. Sort of like that human movie, Deadly Armament Free, where the men failed to defuse the explosive and had to grab the cat. Desi glanced over at Senshiki, who was being inscrutable as ever. Not that she was remotely tempted to grin. At the moment, Mel was just finishing up her call to the palace, and everyone around the breakfast table was hushed. Tense. Even if a princess had to make that kind of call, it wasn't something you expected to overhear. It wasn't proper, Wickhama. I found myself under considerable restraints. Melondi sat on her omnipad, idly tearing an innocent papaya into fragments. Yes, I know, but some portions put me in distress. The woman should never have taken us near the personal chambers. You're certain it's not an imposition? Melande's distress had been clear after she came home. Not that she'd shown it around her family, but privately? Desi didn't know Solana Dasari, but she would not want to be in that girl's shoes. I wish I'd been able to see you while we were there. I want you to meet Vadim and I... What? Dinner with both of them? Tomorrow? Frowning in consternation, Melande paused, the remains of her papaya now a ground hash. Obviously I can't attend the commencement address with the Dasaris, but this will be twice. No, never mind. I know it's traditional, but with my mother away, I hope to enjoy some personal time. Please set up the usual arrangements for transportation and respond that I'll be there. It was just one casual phone call. With anyone else, it would have been perfectly innocent. Changing a date, moving dinner plans, talking to an old friend. Fine. I'll consider the other matter taken care of. Thank you for understanding, Wakama. Goodbye. Somewhere, someone's about to have a very bad day. Princess Kalira Tersu sat her omnipad down on the table, folded her hands and sighed. Desi regarded her best friend as she peered down at the remains of her breakfast papaya, studied it for a moment, then slowly looked up. I need to vent. Mel grimaced unhappily as she picked out a fresh papaya from the basket on the table. You're my friends and I trust you. Desi nodded and reached out to pat her friend on the arm. Life was back to normal. So if you breathe a word of this, there won't be an ice world cold enough. For a value of normal. Lady Wakama set down her omnipad and smiled. Her little girl was becoming a woman. There had been tremendous pride in helping the princess grow up. As the Empress's youngest child, Kalira would have been destined for the Northern Palace, but that had been before the incident with her father. Kamalesh had acted in the only way an Empress could, but it had devastated the family. Kamordri hadn't understood. Some said she had been too devoted to her father, while others said it was a flaw in her character. Too much like her father. Wakama considered it was the latter. Mother and daughter became estranged, and the rift only grew worse with time. After Kamordri entered the interior, the rift was seen as permanent. Kamordri was bequeathed the Northern Palace, and Wakama watched her captain, her commander, her empress, try to forget her grief over a child as well as a husband. Brought in as Kalira's guardian, Wakama had nurtured the girl as best she could. It was a rare privilege, and she treasured her bond with both mother and daughter. A perfect contrast to Kamordri, Kalira seemed destined for the Western Palace and marriage, a happy ending for the young woman, who would make a fine duchess. Kalandra's death had changed everything. As her empress, Wakama revered Kamalesh, but moreover she understood her. Despite the passage of time, you should never underestimate smiling old marines. They still remembered everything they used to do. As a tactician, Kami had always known how to net more than one fish at a throw. Events were unfolding, and Lady Wakama, formerly Chief Master Sergeant Wakama of the Blackstone, intended to see them through. As Kalira's guardian, she was part of the imperial family's inner circle. The position bestowed such powers needed to ensure the well-being of the family, and with the Empress away, those powers were fairly absolute. Still, some duties were more enjoyable than others. During the tour, Tavi hadn't disgraced herself to the point where Wakama appeared by coincidence, but it had been a near thing. Preserving Kalira's cover came before tearing Tavi a new one, but less than an hour after the tour, Wakama had taken Tavi into her office. Tavi's family connections meant removing the woman was impossible, much less a proper ass-chewing, but there were other options. Unfortunately, Tavi's new duties required her presence the very next morning. The promotion meant she was destined for great things. The Imperial Palace thanked her for her service. And above all, have a safe trip. As a reporter, Kellogg believed in journalistic integrity. You seized the initiative with a story but kept a balanced perspective. You did not morally equivocate, and you didn't insert yourself. At least, that was what she'd been taught at school. Working as a night shift reviewer on the backup news desk, those principles seemed irrelevant. You pored over endless reams of dross, just hoping to find one interesting nugget from the morning news. Actually working a story had been a fantasy, and a future in the backroom seemed like her destiny. Until she got lucky. Lark knew she was a long way off from not inserting herself into the story. She wasn't just telling his story, she was living it. Then one story had turned into two. A documentary on Professor Warwick was the sort of thing that could start a career, but the story of Kalira Tassu? That was the sort of thing that made you for life. Open access to the early years of an imperial princess? That just didn't happen, and as Kalira Tassu started to vent, Lark understood if she betrayed that trust, a career would be the least of her worries. And the simpering bitch took us right past my father's bedchambers, gibbering on like some sort of mentally deficient cretin. Can you believe it? I wanted to nail her tits to the floor, to make her beg for forgiveness, but could I? No! I had to act like I had no idea, to smile like some clueless idiot, and all while Solana Desari was patting Vadim's hand. Kalira's hand pounded on the table before clutching at the air. Taking care of my cousin, my ass. My great-grandmother would have chained her to a rock and watched her drown when the tide came in. Lark imagined that if she swallowed, it would be heard around the room. As rants went, Kalira's was imaginative, and it definitely came from the heart. No one breathed a word while Kalira unleashed a torrent of pent-up frustration over her life, her name, her courtship of Vadim, some woman named Tavi, and the endless personal paper cuts being visited on her by Solana Desari. Somewhere near the middle of the tirade, it sort of felt like flying. Having Kalira's trust was a privilege, like standing on the edge of a cliff watching a blazing sunset. It was a rare and magnificent display, but you couldn't quite ignore the odds of plunging onto the jagged rocks below. Like every sunset, it wound down to the end. Princess Kalira Tassu huffed once, subsided, and somehow Melondi was there in her place. I'm sorry. I apologize. Melondi looked down at her hands, a dark indigo suffusing her cheeks as she blushed. It's just been a lot. As your advisor, I can personally say that 2 assassination attempts are a lot. Desi shrugged, keeping her tone light. But come on, we've been here beside you, watched it happening, kept each other's secrets, we get it. Melondi sighed, looking sheepishly at Desi. The spinal implant had been taking effect, and Desi's tremors were few and far between. If there was anyone who could tease the Grinshaw right now, it was her. Desi, Nope, no more apologies. If it wasn't for you, I'd have been chucked out of school instead of gaining a family. Deshin chirped, shaking her head. You're our friend and you're our princess, in whichever order that needs to be. Goddess, I don't understand half of what you lived through, much less how. Melondi's shoulders hunched as she slouched down in her chair. A glimmer of anger crested over her features like a wave, but it passed. What didn't you understand? Well, your father. Everyone knows it's not open for discussion, and I'm not prying. I just didn't really have one, either. Deshi said warily, before shrugging it off. Before the academy, I always assumed the nobility knew. No one knows. Letzi shook her head. The Empress serves the people. Prying into her personal life isn't done. People do hear things, one of the twins offered, glancing over at her sister, who bit her lip pensively. Drowning Solana Desari on a rock would probably get around. If you wish to explain, you will, Sinshiki said flatly, while grooming an imaginary tuft of fur back into place. Some secrets age badly when they're kept too long. It was the sort of thing only Sinshiki would say, but Lark felt herself prickle with anticipation. This would never see publication, but as Melondi glanced around the table, Lark imagined Mel's eyes lingering on her a moment longer than the others. Getting a father? You have no idea how much I envy you, Desi. Melondi licked her lips once, her gaze drifting into the past. "I never knew mine. You have no idea what it's like growing up and knowing your father was a traitor." Lark recoiled at hearing it spelled out so plainly. Everyone knew what the Empress had done, but no one knew why. Those who knew had never spoken of it, and those that didn't dared not ask. Melondi drew in a deep breath as if diving into deep waters. "When my grandmother, Empress Callista, passed away, my aunt did something imprudent. The line of succession was settled, but Arduino was convinced she should be the heir. Anyway, my mother's marriage was political. House Stamantios was prominent. My mother had a career in the military." Melondi rested her head on one hand, rubbing her temple slowly. "Honestly, I don't think they saw each other very much. Arduino used that to seduce my father. Though if you ask some people, they're not sure who seduced who. She convinced him that if he backed her, she could take the throne. My mother had to protect herself. She couldn't risk the Imperium tearing itself apart in a civil war, so she did what she had to without hesitation. She was at the Black Rock when Arduino and my father made their announcement at the palace. Within an hour, the Glaives seized my aunt, and when my mother arrived, she sealed my father inside and listened to him die." Melondi's eye shot over to Zenshiki, and her words were hot with years of buried anger bubbling back to the surface. "Does that satisfy your curiosity? Because I do not want to hear any stupid remarks about him being a waste of meat." "Your father was Kextrex," Zenshiki said without flinching. "My bandmothers would understand everything except lingering at the door. We do not punish ourselves over what has to be. I only wonder why your aunt was not sealed inside." "My aunt's a Tessu, and my mother loves Indara. Arduino was sent away for a long time. Anyway, not everyone understood. Kalandri supported our mother, but Komodri never let it go," Melondi said bitterly. "So no, those rooms will never be opened in my mother's lifetime. And whatever happens to that Tavi woman, it will be too good for her." Tavi bridled as she sped through the night. The bleak terrain beyond the autocab's windows was shrouded in gloom, and she could well imagine the frigid landscape outside. She shuddered, ordering the autocab to raise the temperature. It was the Tor. It had to be the Tor. Intercepting Princess Kalira had been a risky gamble, of course, but it was an opportunity to show her quality. One look at the girl was enough to see who she was. Kalira didn't have her mother's rough-hewn features, chiseled from years of hard service in the Imperial Marines, but the resemblance was there to anyone who knew to look. With her Imperial Highness and much of the court still away, it was a desperate gamble for advancement, a chance to seize advancement by distinguishing her service. And her gamble had paid off. "Assistant Vizier of Public Affairs? No longer!" Tavi rubbed her hands gleefully over her good fortune. "Chief Secretary for Public Affairs at the Northern Palace? Oh, one does like the sound of it." "Are you dense as lead?" Solani murmured, as the mid-morning sun washed over the communal bedroom. Nestled in the crook of his arm, the Marine propped herself up as if expecting an answer. Laying off to his right and working on her lesson plans, Mavere felt to suppress a grin when Shalea quietly snickered. "I don't get it." Tom frowned at Lani's cheeky smile. "All I asked was why Melondi's in a mood." Lani's expression faltered and she peered at him. Tom wasn't sure what he said, but he had the feeling he was being slow. A look over at Miv and Leia confirmed it. Both peered back at him with the expression you reserved for a student who might not get the clue. With no help from his wives, Tom took a deep breath and faced his fiancée. "All right, so she came home in a mood. She didn't want to talk about it to me. What am I missing? Something with Redeem?" "You see, dear heart?" Mavere leaned in to kiss his shoulder. "You got there in the end." "Women don't get that worked up unless it's over a man," Shalea offered drowsily from under the winter duvet. "She was probably too embarrassed to say anything and, well, you know." Tom waited for the other shoe to drop, but understanding eluded him. Shulvanti women were like human men, except when they weren't. It was an imprecise formula that could fail you at the worst possible times. Still, he knew he was on the right track. We all heard her muttering about Solana last night. Tom set his omnipad aside and focused on the problem. It felt like a marriage fundamentals kind of question. So she's... what? Gathering her thoughts? Getting over it? Lani groaned in exasperation and rolled over on her back. It gave him a nice view down her nightshirt, but he could tell he'd swung and missed. It's not his fault, Lani. He was alone when I found him. People shouldn't do that to themselves, particularly men. Miv peered down the bed at her future co-wife, before arching an eyebrow at him. That includes human men. Kalera looks up to you like a father, Tom. Don't you get that? I've spent the last few months watching her. 8 hours a day. If you can't see it, then at least trust me on this. Solani rolled over again, and propped herself up on her good hand, peering at him again. No girl wants someone poaching her boyfriend, but the only thing worse would be losing him with an audience. Tom stopped himself from saying, and tried to think the problem through. It was a problem. How was he supposed to offer relationship advice on men if he couldn't see the forest for the trees? Right, I get that. She's Dess's best friend. If she wasn't who she is, I'd already consider her part of the family. But she's a princess. Whatever it is, it can't be that bad. So dense, Solani huffed, blowing an errant lock of hair out away from her eyes. That's exactly why it's bad. Tom licked his lips and reframed the question in his mind. It wasn't a people thing. It was a princess thing, and not knowing the ins and outs of Shulvanti nobility was at least a forgivable gap in his knowledge. Still, it dawned on him that it was a gap he needed to close. Tom, it's stunning how often you act like a Shulvanti woman, yet still don't grasp what that means. Mavere leaned in and stroked his chest. Leah and I had our husband. You had your wife. I want you to imagine that you had one chance for happiness. Just one. And you were absolutely certain that one chance was the most you'd ever have. Now, imagine fumbling around as a young woman. You're desperately trying to not let it slip through your fingers while everyone watches. It's beyond humiliating. Tom, you really should talk to Melondi. Not Desi. You. An adult. At least, once you're thinking clearly. Leia hoisted herself up and draped herself over Miv's shoulder, peering at him. You've shown us your movies. Humans, just moving from relationship to relationship like it's easy? Miv, what was that idiotic phrase we heard about fish? There's always another fish in the sea. Mavere's expression spoke volumes about context. Imagine having only one chance. No second tries. Shalea pursed her lips together. Most of the girls here will have a husband, but the average girl what I teach? She'll probably have 3 or 4 co-wives, but could just as easily never find a husband at all. You have no idea how lucky I feel that you all let me in, Solani whispered soberly. I never thought I'd get a man. And Kalera? Melondi? She loves Badim, and it's not some political arrangement. She'll be devastated if she lost him, and the only thing worse would be admitting it to you. I suppose so, Tom nodded, as the implications hit home. He spent so many years alone, but there'd been a self-imposed exile. Even born of grief, there'd still been a matter of choice. I suppose you try to hold on to the people you love with all that you've got, no matter how dysfunctional they are. What do you mean she's not coming? That's just... What? So she's not coming to the commencement address either? Well, I suppose I don't mind, but that's gratitude for you, Solana. Phrysis sniffed over her call. Ask Vadim if his other friends want to come over. Perhaps one of them will appreciate the ticket. Yes, yes. We'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye. Some people. Phrysis set down her omnipad and shook her head. Honestly, Jennifer, I could understand if she had family to visit, but she said they were off-world. Young women these days. Jennifer looked up from her cup of coffee and cocked her head to one side. What happened? It's that Melondi girl who's been mooning over my nephew. Vadim told Solana that she's refused to join us at the stadium, and now she won't even be here for dinner tomorrow. One invitation I could see, but two? Frances shut her eyes and sipped her tea. This was an important trip, yet things seemed to go wrong every moment she wasn't looking. It can't be that bad, can it? Jennifer's brow furrowed in concern. She may have had a good reason to bow out. It's just ingratitude. Thank goodness Vadim has Solana looking out for him. Frances sighed with feeling. I'm even making my specialty. It will still be a lovely dinner. Frances glanced over at Jennifer before examining her tea, provided Eli doesn't make an ass of himself. The conquest and absorption of the other Vati across Shil required over 2 centuries, and as each queendom was absorbed into the burgeoning empire, their palace was taken as property of the throne. Many were dispensed as gifts to newly formed duchies. Eventually, only the 4 remained. As cardinal points around the capital, the outer palaces were monuments of Shilvanti history and homes to the Empress's favoured children. For the civil service, assignment to any palace was a mark of distinction, a stepping stone in a rising career. That said, a hierarchy eventually emerged. Tasteful in situation and aspect, the Eastern Palace was given into the custody of the heir apparent, and an assignment invariably led to promotion. The West and Southern Palaces lay in temperate and tropical areas of Shil, and were regarded as a delight. Then there was the Northern Palace. The rocky Northern Peninsula was sparsely populated. The ancestral lands of hard women and fiercely exotic men, the Kampvati were one of the last queendoms to fall, making the Northern Palace symbolic of the final unity of Shil under the global imperium. It remained the least desirable of the outer palaces, with cool summers and long, miserable winters. A mark of distinction, yes, but a prize to be endured more than savoured. Over the generations, several princesses had tried to make the Northern Palace into a winter retreat, a place for summer fairs and winter celebrations. Under its current governess, the Princess Camordri, it had become more of a crucible to escape. After the disappearance of Kadira Sariva and the reassignment of her aide, Arisa Moifal, their duties had fallen on the shoulders of Agent Halami Jesreen. A diligent young woman of a modest house, it soon became abundantly clear that Zariva had absorbed the duties of several other positions to exercise direct control over the Camordri's personal affairs. The two were said to be inseparable, and when viewed from a distance, it was an understandable arrangement. When seen up close, working directly for Princess Camordri was more the stuff of nightmares, and being a woman of sound mind and wits, the arrival of Esin Tarvi was seen as a gift from the goddess. Halami promised herself she'd transition the woman into her role, with a thorough briefing regarding Her Highness's preferences and predilections. You never use the word eccentricities. After a long morning, where Tarvi droned on as a self-proclaimed expert in these matters, Jesreen was reminded of those 4 words that mean so much in life. Better you than me. After a few compliments over Tarvi's qualifications, Halami Jesreen watched in horrified fascination as the new Chief Secretary for Public Affairs ushered the morning's only appointment into the presence of Princess Camordri Tassu before escaping to the refectory for a mug of tea. While little regarded, it is often on such moments that history turns. Ensconced in her office, Camordri Tassu was in a mood. The disappearance of Kadira Sariva wasn't merely distressing, it felt like she was being isolated from everything that mattered. The fete, while she was away, some minor ceremony for the Science Academy had turned into this social event of the season, and then somehow imploded into the disaster of the year. People were avoiding her invitations, as if the stigma somehow attached itself to her. She'd been dragged off shore by her duty to her family. It simply wasn't fair. Fair or not, she was the governess of the Northern Palace and all its domains, and support or no, she determined to get her home in order. A spring festival was in order, which meant getting the ballroom fumigated, again, but also ridding the estate of those vile pouchadillos. The gardens were the centrepiece of the palace, its crowning glory. There was no sense trying to plant balls with the vermin eating everything in sight. There were mixed feelings when Camaldry viewed the trio who entered her office. The bowing woman was reasonably presentable, but the other two? Camaldry stifled a sigh. There was a speech to consider for the first of Evrovi, a triumph that would be hers alone, and only the day after tomorrow. Yet she still had to face an interminable dinner with her brother and sister. She had things to attend to, no one to help, and the group before her were less than promising. One did what one could. Camaldry waited until the trio stood at her desk before striking a peremptory pose, and deigning to look at her new functionary. "Well, but aren't you going to be introduced?"
Your Royal Highness?"
Camaldry felt her brows knit as she tried to pass meaning from the lavishly accented woman bowing precariously before her desk.
"My name is Tavi. Essen Tavi. Your new
Jesus. Okay.
My name is Tavi. Essen Tavi. Your new Chief Secretary for Public Affairs."
"How? My new Chief Secretary?"
Yes."
The woman glanced up once as gravity threatened to pull her over, and hastily looked back at the floor.
"I flew to your aid, once I received word of your summons."
The fresh bleating from the woman seemed no more comprehensible than the before, but there was little point in instructing the woman when she seemed ready to collapse on the sideboard. Patience was in order, and she tried again. "So be it." She waved away the matter graciously. "Now, as to the business of the day."
"Oh, yes, Your Royal Highness. I wish to present Dr. Pradoon, the animal control specialist, and this is Pavis Kosrin, her associate."
"How, you say, associate?" The woman's eyes slid back and forth searchingly before she mustered her nerve.
"Yes."
"Well, but I am nearly given to think that you meant to say that they are associates."
That is, well, I think so."
"Well, but I very nearly think you did."
And you would be right. Of course."
"And I would be right to do so." Camaldry nodded firmly, settling the matter. That only left the matter of the other two women to deal with. The animal control specialist was a woman she had been aware of, certainly, but her actual presence was another matter. An unprepossessing figure of a woman of average size, she boasted strong arms, but Camaldry found herself captivated by the woman's fake eye, which was slowly rolling toward the ceiling. It gave the woman the ghastly appearance of a stunned Taurox, and Camaldry forced herself to look away. Not that her companion was any improvement. Stuffed in a crisp lavender dress shirt roughly half a size too small, and worn slacks, the Kosrin woman was hardly an improvement. Festooned with satchels and clutching a video camera, she didn't stand upright so much as throw off to all sides. As a veteran member of the interior, Camaldry had a keen eye for detail. She knew at once she was faced with common people. There was nothing for it but to get matters back on track. Was her time not invaluable? Was she not pressed by a public appearance? A state dinner without the Empress? Her mother. Always her mother. No, this Evrovi was her chance to stand apart, even in front of people such as these. There were times when it was necessary to make a personal approach, and Camaldry turned grandly, her arm sweeping to the window. "Well, but surely my problem is clear. Am I not beset on all sides?" Camaldry gazed over her beloved gardens to the courtyard below, as it glimmered under a heavy frost. "Do I not have an impression to make? Yet my gardens are infested with vermin." "Ah, don't worry. I'll kill them all before spring." She hadn't expected an answer, yet the exterminator seemed to possess a raw appreciation of the depth of her quandary. "I mean, on anything you do, your princess-ship." "Well, and did I not just say so?" The Tavi woman perked up, bobbing up and down like an excited channel boy.
I very hurly think you did.
And I would be right to do so. Camordry nodded once more. At least the secretary was catching on. Her success in getting food to these people proved she had been right in every particular... Am I not to make the opening address for Ifrovi? Am I not to hold a state dinner for my bereaved family? How is one to make a proper impression to so many, isolated away from the capital under such dreadful conditions? Well, that part's easy. Camordry cantered ahead imperiously as the Cosreen person with the camera spoke up. Surely this would be a lark, but if indulging the exterminator's aid was the price to be paid for good service, then so be it. Camordry turned to view the woman, wobbling in place. Well, but how can it be done? Indulge me! People. They'll believe anything you show 'em, Your Highness. Cosreen nodded, her jowls taking on a life of their own. Trust me, the right picture at the right time can break or make someone. I think you have very nearly said so, but how when I'm isolated here? Camordry gazed sharply out the window once more. If nothing else, this Ifrovi was vital. The commencement address given by the Empress was hers to deliver. Kadira was gone, and she needed to put her brother and her slip of a sister in their proper place. But how? How to cultivate the hearts of the people? What am I to these people who know nothing of me? Well, Deeps, that's even better. The less they know, the more you get to work with. Cosreen barked out a caustic bray of laughter. You're not alone. You're a humble servant of the Empire, you know. A woman of mystery, stoically carrying out her duties to the Imperium. Camordry gazed into the icy winter sky and nodded wistfully. So very true. Damn right. It just takes a few pictures. Something behind the scenes, you know. Quiet. Determined. Showing you off as a lone woman of action. Cosreen warbled jovially. What do they do around here anyway? The question caught Camordry off guard. It was impertinent. Yet Camordry couldn't help but be touched by the Cosreen woman. Kadira was gone, yet however boorish and base, it was gratifying to meet someone who so clearly understood her. The Northern Palace and its surrounding domains offered very little but scrub and heather, but still, what did the simple folk do? How, around here? Why, fishing, I suppose. There you go, then. Big game fishing? That's just the thing. One woman alone on the ocean, courageously battling the surf and storms. People who did... There you go, then. Big game fishing? That's just the thing. One woman alone on the ocean, courageously battling the surf and storms. People who'd eat that shit up. Begging your pardon? It was an idea with merit. Every royal had their private time, jealously guarded from the prying eyes of the public. No one could say what she did. Well, no one that mattered. Still... Well, and what of you, Secretary? What do the people back in the palace think of such activities?
How, Your Royal Highness? Who asked me what the people think?
Goddess, I nearly think I have. Tavi smiled brightly, clearly warming to her new station.
And you are very gracious to do so.
So, and yet you must answer me.
I certainly shall. I most certainly shall.
I await nothing better, Camordry said primly.
Well, and here it is then.
Tavi wobbled toward a bow, before being waved off, and she steadied herself.
Shulvanti are of a nautical mind. I believe fishing is a sport of some fascination to the common woman.
A fine plan, Camordry said wistfully, before reality took hold. And yet...
And yet?
Tavi spoke up, stepping into the dramatic pause with reasonable timing. Yes, and yet... Camordry sniffed. How is such a thing to be done? I have no time for such things while responsibilities press about me. Oh, bugger that, Cosrine snorted. I just need a few shots of you on the water and I can doctor up anything. Trust me, your ladyship. No one will ever know the difference. The appeal to the common woman. If such a thing could be managed with discretion, she could finally gain the respect she deserved. Camorgi nearly blanched when she turned back to the exterminator. The woman's flaccid eyeball was slowly rolling in to inspect her nostril. Well, and what are your thoughts on this matter? Oh, a big game fishing, your highness? Why, that's a real sport. Heart and soul of every outdoor woman. Dr. Pradoon nodded thoughtfully. I know just the place to borrow a boat.